Hello, today we're going to be talking about Chapter 8, Securing the Republic, which covers the years 1790 to 1815. Sometimes this is called the Early Republic, as this covers the first sort of political era of American history. Let's see. So, first of all, this is basically the first period in American history where people are building American pride, and there's sort of this idea that there's a great experiment. The United States government is a great experiment in republicanism, as we heard about last week when talking about the Constitution. And now that the Constitution has been accepted, George Washington, the great hero, has been elected president, the question is, how can liberty succeed? How can this experiment succeed? And so everybody sees themselves as a player in the game, trying to help make this succeed. At first, things seem pretty even, or pretty non-confrontational when Washington is president. And he's such a hero. He's unanimously elected. He comes into office, and he leads the country the same way he led the military, without bias, and he sort of sees himself as an enlightened leader, and so he doesn't make rash decisions. He sort of allows the people to make the decisions that they need to make, and tempers them when there's some reason for him to be worried, if things are getting too heated or too dangerous. But it is under Washington, or rather in Washington's cabinet, that the very first political parties are formed, despite the fact that that's the last thing President Washington wanted. In fact, most people believed that political parties would be the death of the Republic. But within his own cabinet, which was comprised of 5 secretaries, the 2 important ones being Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson and the Secretary of the Treasury Alexander Hamilton. Now, John Adams is vice president, and he belongs in the debate, but he's not. He and Washington don't exactly get along, and therefore he's sort of left out of the opportunity to, he's left out of this little portion of history. And the big question comes over the control of finances and the government. You can see here a picture of a Philadelphia bank. Hamilton believed that this new federal government needed to have a strong banking system, that it needed to protect the cities and the merchants in those cities. Essentially, he wanted to create a model of the English Parliament, except for instead of a king and a despot, it would be ruled by, this beautiful Republican government. In other words, it would be England had it been run the right way. Jefferson and Madison, on the other hand, Madison being, leader of the first Congress, first Speaker of the House of Representatives, they thought that America's future laid with the farmer. You see here, venerate the plow. Most Americans were working on the farm. They weren't living in cities, and Jefferson believed that these would be the future of America, and that a strong central government with high banking systems and favors toward the merchants would disadvantage the farmers who rely too heavily on market stability. We see that there's some, bargaining going on between the two. It's not that they can't work together. In fact, the first bargain that they make has to do with the foundation of the new capital. You can see here the plan for Washington, D.C. It was originally supposed, the first capital of the United States was Philadelphia. Then it moves to New York City. There's a fear that wherever the capital is, that state will become too powerful. So they make an agreement to set aside land that is neither in any state and is, although closer to the south, neither the north nor the south. And that's an agreement made, it's a backdoor deal sort of made between Jefferson and Hamilton. One of the major issues, before I move on, one of the major issues of this time period also comes from the French Revolution. While the French Revolution is obviously going on in France, France and England are still at war with each other, and those major issues are also the 2 most common nations for the United States to be trading with. and therefore their conflicts, as well as the conflicts within France, this fight for liberty, equality, and fraternity, these things affect the United States, which is this very highly influential nation, or not highly influential, but highly influenced nation. And we'll see that as we go on, that Jefferson and his faction start to agree with the French in their push for liberty, and Hamilton and his faction start to agree more with the British. We start to see the emergence of the two political parties, right? So they're no longer factions, but political parties. The party which believes in a strong central government is called the Federalist Party, and that is run by Alexander Hamilton, but it also includes such figures as John Jay and John Adams. Also, it's contested, but most people would agree that George Washington himself was a Federalist. On the other hand, you have the no longer anti-Federalists, but Democratic Republicans, and we'll get to them in just a minute. One of the major issues, and I won't talk too much about it, but I want you to look at Washington's reaction to the Whiskey Rebellion. So make sure that you take a look in there on the Whiskey Rebellion and pay particular attention to how Washington reacts to it. He does something which is sort of out of his character. The next thing I want to talk about is the Republican Party. The Republican Party fit more the ideals of the French Revolution, and this idea that the Republic would only succeed if states were allowed to sort of control themselves. These would be the former anti-Federalists mostly. But you'll also see that Madison, who was a Federalist, moves over onto this side. This is, again, the party that believes in the farmer, the small town, and supports things like the Southern plantation. I'm going to have to pause it. My phone is ringing. Sorry about that. Okay. So we also see, some increase in, people are making use of this new Bill of Rights, using their freedom of the press. You can see here a diagram for how a newspaper was printed. If you follow the steps, each letter had to be laid. It's a very interesting process. You may even look up a video on it. You see that people start to become, partly because of this press, people become entrenched in their ideas. You start to see people starting these organizations. You also see women starting to get involved, and this is one of the first times that we're going to see that. Not only is there Republican motherhood, as we've discussed already, but there's also this sense that in America, women have a role to play. If you read A Vindication of the Rights of Women by Mary Wollstonecraft, it explains that women have a part in society, and that they're just as influential as men, despite their difference in character. And there is still a very clear distinction between men and women. In society, women are not granted the right to vote or anything of that nature, but you can see that women are starting to become more involved. You can even see here that little girls are taught, when they learn their alphabet, they're also taught to sort of, you can see here the eagle, and you can see talking about their country and their state. People are proud to be American, whether they're male or female. In 1796, Washington steps down after 2 terms as president, and John Adams is elected president. Now, John Adams runs against Thomas Jefferson. So back in the day, the loser of the election, or the second place winner of the election, becomes the vice president. There is no vice presidential ticket. And with a distinct Federalist in power, Congress falls into a bit of chaos. You can see here that in 1798, a fight broke out on the floor of Congress, and someone grabbed the tongs from the fireplace, and another man was beat. A man from Connecticut and a man from Vermont fought. Eventually, Adams had the man from Vermont, who was not in his party, arrested as part of the Alien and Sedition Act. You see that there's a lot of disagreement between Federalists and Republicans. At this same time, Thomas Jefferson secretly writes the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, which basically say that nullify the power of the Federalists. It says the Federalist government can say, or the federal government can say whatever they want, but real power resides in the states, and he establishes this idea of the states' rights. Adams is, I hate to say it as much as I like the guy, Adams's presidential term is really one fraught with scandal and chaos. Although he did something very important, he kept America out of France and England's wars, out of the Napoleonic Wars. He was unable to keep balance between the parties, which Washington had done. And he did violate several aspects of the Bill of Rights with his Alien and Sedition Act. So I would ask you to look into that as well. In 1800, Jefferson runs again against several others. This time there are more people, and Adams loses. Jefferson comes in first, and he calls it the Revolution of 1800 because the power shifts from one political party to another. In most republics, it never works out this way. Someone has to die before political powers shift, and no one dies. It's a very peaceful revolution, but Jefferson becomes the president with Aaron Burr as his vice president, which is also a major issue. You should read more on that. I'm not sure. Hold on a second. Yes. So Jefferson is accused of being far too friendly with the French, which, of course, when you're English-born citizens turned American, you don't like this idea. You can see that Jefferson is burning things on the altar of Gallic, which means French despotism. And he's being stopped by the American eagle, right? The eagle of liberty. Here we can see again, that the Federalist Party loses outright. They still exist, pretty strongly in New England, but for the most part, they're really failing in the Middle States and in the South. And you can see the Republicans coming out as victors. There's lots of issues going on here. Slavery is sadly becoming, in the North it's becoming less and less popular, and in fact it's being banned in several northern states. But in the South it's becoming more entrenched in their government and the way that they run. Also to do with slaves, we see at this time period the Haitian Revolution led by Toussaint Louverture. It's a break-off of the French Revolution, and it actually leads to something fairly important for the American government. We also see here, this is a picture of Washington, D.C., which looks like a little podunk town. Washington was really a brand new town, not very powerful. And speaking of not very powerful, the Supreme Court, which is written into the Constitution, until 1800 really hasn't had an opportunity to express any of its checks and balances or its powers over the other states. And we learn about judicial review in this chapter, so please make sure that you understand the concept of judicial review. Because of the Haitian Revolution, this large portion of the New World or the continent becomes open because Napoleon no longer needs France's holdings in North America. And he actually sells them to Thomas Jefferson for something like 3 cents an acre. But it's several, millions of acres, so several millions of dollars. And Jefferson does this, by the way, without the permission of the federal or the states or Congress, which is largely against the principles of the Republican Party. But he does it anyway. He increases the United States by 1/3 or more. You can see how large this territory is. He sends Lewis and Clark on an expedition of this territory. You can see, they took detailed descriptions of the land and the territory to send back. Another major issue under Jefferson is, what to do with this Louisiana Purchase. You see here under Jefferson, there's also the very famous embargo. Jefferson, because of the wars with England and France, he could not help the American sailors. You want to look into the embargo crisis. You can see here a political cartoon. Oh, grab me is embargo backwards. You need to know what an embargo is. And then we come to the Second War of Independence, which is also called the War of 1812, which is a tremendous loss for the United States. Here you see Washington, the city of Washington being burned, Baltimore being burned. So definitely look into the purpose of the War of 1812, and pay close attention to the timeline at the front of